UFC, наоборот, меня позлило, что такого соперника дало. Это для них, как бы, можно сказать, неуважение в мою сторону, да? Как бы, почему они так себя повели, что давали мне такого соперника? Я достоин большего.
Arman Tsarukyan. He's just a little posh boy who's had everything handed to him on a silver platter by his dad.
Do you think he actually got injured or no? Or what do you think happened?
No, he's a little bitch ass. That's what you are, Arman.
Alright, so Arman Tsarukyan is back in the news cycle for calling out the UFC as being disrespectful for offering him a rematch with 7th ranked Mateusz Gamrot. How dare they? I gotta say, man, this dude is doing a magnificent job at jeopardizing his entire career this year, and we're not even halfway through 2025. What a bold move it is to publicly insult the UFC matchmakers just a few short months after he single-handedly caused a nightmare situation at UFC 311 for pulling out less than 24 hours before the event. Seriously, his sense of entitlement here is insane, and I know for sure that once this quote of his gets back to Dana, he's going to make Tsarukyan's road back to a title shot even harder than he already had planned. Because unless your name is John Jones, Dana hates when his slaves, I mean fighters, act entitled towards the company. But in all honesty, seeing as the guy was raised ludicrously rich, I guess I'm not all that shocked that this is how he acts when he doesn't get his way, and yeah, in this video I'll be talking about all this and more. Before we go any further, let's go into his full quote. Unfortunately, the interview where he said all of this wasn't done in English, so you're gonna have to read the subtitles.
Мне предложили бой в Абу-Даби в июле, главный бой вечера, но я отказался из-за того, что они соперника предлагали того, с кем я не хотел драться, то есть ниже рейтингом. И я не видел смысла с ним драться.
Что сейчас чуть позлишь UFC этим, потому что, ну, была история с отмененным поединком, и ты говорил после, что тебе, в принципе, без разницы с кем драться, и сейчас получается так, что все-таки разница есть.
Не, UFC, наоборот, меня позлило, что такого соперника дало. Это для них, как бы, можно сказать, неуважение в мою сторону, да? Как бы, почему они так себя повели, что давали, представляешь? Ну, хотя бы там, ладно, Хукера бы дали, да, который там из победной серии кого-то выиграл в последнее время.
Yo, I'm sorry, but Arman is dumb for saying this. Mind you, I'm saying that he's dumb for saying this, not that he's dumb for having this stance on the situation. Because honestly, I actually respect his reasoning that he needs to fight a higher ranked opponent in order to better position himself for an immediate title shot, assuming he wins his next fight. That being said, my admiration for him begins and ends there. The fact that Arman has the audacity to voice complaints about any matchup the UFC offers him is pretty ridiculous given how he royally screwed over his last title shot in January. Especially given the fact that I'm still like 99% sure that he wasn't injured at all and almost definitely pulled out of the event because he knew he wasn't going to make weight. I made a video about why I think this a couple of months ago, but I feel like the best evidence that supports my little conspiracy theory is what Renato Moicano says here a couple of days after the event.
And then I went to sleep, it was like midnight. Hunter, the CEO of UFC, he worked with Dana White, and he called me and said, "Hey Moicano, I need you on the champion weight tomorrow, 155, not 156. And I say, "Hey Hunter, what happened? Is everything okay?" And he said, "No, you know what? It's okay. The fight is still happening, but both guys are pretty heavy, so I don't have a replacement. If somebody goes wrong, we're gonna call you." But then Hunter told me again, he said, "Hey, now I need you to make the weight, and we're going to pay you for that." And I say, "Okay."
Frankly, if this isn't enough to convince you that his little back injury excuse was a fake story the whole time, then I really don't know what to tell you. Not to mention that 2 days after pulling out of the event due to his back injury, this guy literally flew out to Los Angeles and appeared on the Jackson podcast. Yeah, dude, your back was in so much pain that you had to pull out of your fight, but less than 48 hours later, you get on a plane and sit in one of the most uncomfortable seats known to mankind. I'm sorry, but I called BS on the back injury story then, and I'm still calling BS on it now. And on that note, seeing as this guy's fuckery single-handedly threw an entire event on its head, the fact that he's crying about disrespect from the UFC is pretty ridiculous. Like, dude, for the amount of headaches that you cause the matchmakers, I don't think you have any right to complain about their matchmaking choices for a while. Also, and I might be crazy here when I say this, I think a rematch with Gamrot sounds pretty reasonable. Like, seriously, does anybody think it's a little weird that he doesn't want to fight Gamrot, seeing as he technically lost against him in 2022? Personally, I thought Arman deserved the judge's decision that night. Regardless, it was an insanely close fight, and I do think that avenging the loss would actually be a good case for him getting back in title contention. Because if he were to win the rematch, especially in convincing fashion, then he could spin some narrative about how he's avenged one of his 2 losses in the UFC and Islam's next or whatever, I don't know. This doesn't even matter though. Arman doesn't deserve anything. He needs to earn his way back into title contention and prove that he can reliably step on the scale at the proper weight. So the fact that this guy is turning down fights and being even more of a headache for the matchmakers is just a bad call in my opinion. Tsarukyan does not have the necessary social capital with fans or leverage with the UFC to be making demands such as this, and I really think that he should have just said yes to the Gamrot rematch. Also, I think it's hilarious how he's so against fighting Gamrot because apparently he's too low ranked for it to be worth it, but in the very same breath says that he'd rather fight Dan Hooker, who is literally ranked one spot above Gamrot. Let's be real, Tsarukyan would rather fight Hooker because stylistically he knows that Dan would be way easier to take down and control than most of the other ranked lightweights. I don't know, maybe that's not even true. What I do know is that after he pulled out of UFC 311, he straight up said that he'd be willing to fight anyone the UFC puts in front of him, and last time I checked, Gamrot is anyone, but here's Arman saying no to fighting him, so make it make sense because I simply cannot. Look, fighters demanding certain matchups isn't anything new, and in some cases it's totally justified, but Tsarukyan just hasn't reached that level of star power or accomplishment to pick and choose opponents. He's a great fighter and arguably champion level material, but he hasn't done nearly enough to dictate terms like he's John Jones or Conor McGregor. Dana White hates entitlement. If there's one thing we've learned about Dana from his decades-long tenure running the UFC, it's that he's spiteful as hell, particularly towards fighters who think they're above the organization. History is littered with talented fighters whose UFC careers got thrown into the trash bin because they wanted to go toe-to-toe with Dana. Do you remember when Dana cut Yair Rodriguez from the entire roster because he declined 2 fights? Because I do. Yair turned down a fight with Ricardo Lamas and blatantly ducked Zabit, so Dana told him to kick rocks. The only reason he was allowed back into the UFC is because he made several repeated apologies. Trust me, I'm not taking Dana's side here, I'm just saying that when he starts to get the impression that one of his fighters is trying to play the game with him, then he always tries to screw them over. Nate Diaz spent years of his career in a contract dispute with the UFC, and then for his last fight in the promotion, they tried to send him off by fighting Hamzat. Thankfully, Dana's plan went to shit and Nate ended up fighting Tony Ferguson, but he definitely tried to make Nate look bad in his last fight. And then of course, Francis Ngannou left the company over a contract dispute, and Dana's been trying to smear his name ever since. And dude, the list goes on, man. Frank Shamrock, Randy Couture, Muhammad Makayev, Demetrius Johnson, and so many other fighters have learned that you can try to play hardball with the UFC as much as you want, but at the end of the day, the house always wins. And I'm not even saying that any of these guys were entitled divas or anything. Obviously, the UFC is a really tough company to work for. What I am saying is that entitled or not, if you cross Dana, especially publicly, he's going to make your life hell. Tsarukyan seems to think he's above the UFC's typical politics, or maybe he thinks he's immune to Dana's wrath because he's been branded as a future star, but he is wrong. Dana doesn't care how promising a fighter's future looks if you're actively bad-mouthing the company because you're not getting what you want. And Tsarukyan is teetering dangerously close to becoming another cautionary tale. Sure, there are some business-savvy fighters who've wisely navigated the politics of their career. Dominic Cruz, Daniel Cormier, and Michael Bisping come to mind, but they are the exception, not the rule. More often than not, UFC fighters' careers implode spectacularly because they lack basic business strategy and even just general self-awareness sometimes. You know, when Paddy Pimblett called Arman a spoiled little rich kid, I wasn't entirely sure what he meant, but hearing him complain about a pretty reasonable matchup definitely gave off the vibe that Arman's pretty used to getting what he wants in life. And hey, I'm not gonna hate on him for his dad being one of the richest people in Armenia, and being rich doesn't instantly make you a bad person, but I do feel like this is a glimpse into how he responds when he doesn't get his way. Unfortunately for him, neither his dad's money nor his luxury sports cars that he bought with his dad's money will be able to change the fact that as long as he's in the UFC, the hand that feeds him is Dana and those around him. And when Tsarukyan does public interviews where he criticizes the UFC's methods, he's biting the hand that's directly responsible for the trajectory of his career. This sort of entitlement is not going to go unnoticed by the UFC brass, and even though I doubt that they're going to immediately start cutting him off from opportunities, I really think that he's continuing down a road that he'll end up regretting. In the UFC, talent alone does not guarantee success or opportunities. Fighters need to play ball, at least to some extent. From what I've heard, Dustin Poirier is actually a pretty tough negotiator, but he's a good case of someone who knows how to manage their relationships with the UFC staff. Fighters obviously need to be tough people, but if they want to be tough negotiators, they need to pick those battles even more wisely than their UFC fights. Tsarukyan, however, is letting his sense of entitlement dictate what he says, and he seems unaware or indifferent to the fact that this approach could torpedo his chances of fighting for a title anytime soon. Ultimately, Arman's recent antics of dubious injuries and rejecting competitive matchups are 2 strikes against him that may end up costing him critical career opportunities. Tsarukyan's ego has him walking a very thin rope between rising stardom and total irrelevance, and if he doesn't recalibrate soon, he might find himself joining the ranks of fighters who threw away their careers because they couldn't see past their own inflated sense of worth. Anyways, that's the video for today. Definitely let me know your thoughts on Arman Tsarukyan. Is he jeopardizing his own career, or am I being too dramatic? As always, if you like the video, then like the video, and if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do so. I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you on the next one. Bye.
With Nina drama, he was like wrestling and shit,
Yeah,
and
and then he was doing them videos where he flips forward on his neck.
Right.
And then he's saying that he's got a bad back. Dana said, didn't he? It was Dana shot him down in that interview. I was like, whoa, that's heavy, that. You don't want the boss saying that about you.
Yeah.
He basically said that like doctors come out ahead of the best masseuse in the PI guy come out and they never said to him, you can't fight. He decided he's not going to fight. So basically, Arman, you shit your pants. Know what I mean? That's what you did. You farted and followed through and had shit coming down your leg. So that's basically what happened.
Yeah, as a fan, that pullout fucking sucked for
Yeah.
sure. Like,